Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. As you are aware, I have my Cooking with Creative show, my Cocktails with Creative show. Today I have invited Nebal Maysaud. Nebal is a creative, they are a composer. They also do some digital marketing and some other really awesome things in our field. Uh, as well as I would call an activist, if you don't mind. Uh, and so Nebal and I have been talking quite a bit about compensation in our field, and we're also drinking mate, depending on where you're from. Mine is from South America, and where is yours from, Nebal?
Yeah, so I have mine in this little gourd from Beirut, um, and the kit is usually from Beirut, and we usually get ours imported from South America.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
And so the how I'd like to just start is I'd love for Nibal to just frame themselves as to where they are at in the field so that we can just get an idea depending, for those who might be further on in their career, for those who might be uh, earlier on in their career, just so that we can know where you fit in that equation.
yeah. So, and I think a lot of folks can get a little bit nervous when talking about where they are in their career because there's sort of this one trajectory that a lot of ha- there's this one trajectory that a lot of folks think about that they have to go by that a lot of very successful composers don't, right? So I would personally call myself a beginning to mid-career composer. Um, I am someone who uh, has the privilege to work with musicians on a regular basis and uh, gets a few commissions per year, and I'm very blessed to uh, get the opportunity to work with some amazing people even through this quarantine. I've had some musicians really step up and try to help out and make sure we can still create music during this time. So I would say that's around where I'm at, kind of getting up there, uh, and I think some folks might call it emerging from what or to what, I don't know, but there is I guess there's an emergence somewhere.
Ugh, I hate the concept of emerging composers. But so to just frame what our conversation will be about today, Nibal was really wonderful and created a primer on setting rates for compensation in as a creative. I think it works pretty well regardless of whether it is a for musicians or for other people who work in as freelancers and creative spaces. Um, and so I thought we would talk about that. And last week I made my own video where I talked a little bit about my experiences. Keep an eye out for in future weeks. I'll be having more guests where they talk about their experiences a little bit more like my video. But today, I invited Nibal on because we really have a lot of like similar opinions about what happens in this field, and I think that for particularly composers who are younger than we are, who are starting to figure these things out, they don't have a lot of really wonderful resources as to where to find how to set rates, but when should they start charging? How should they start charging? Why should they start charging? And stuff like that. So that's mostly what we'll talk about today.
Did you know about 80% of the people who watch my videos are not currently subscribed to my channel? Did you also know that about 60% of the people who watch my videos come from some sort of external source like Facebook? So please, if you like my videos, subscribe to my channel. It really helps a lot. If you like the video, like it. It helps with the Facebook algorithm. And finally, if you want to hear something new or if you want to comment on something I said, please leave a comment. I try my best to respond to every single comment that I get, and whether it's good or bad, and I look forward to hearing from you. This community is why I keep doing this. So thank you so much for being a supporter.
So Nibal, you made this really wonderful primer, and I was wondering what was your process for creating it, and what was the most challenging aspect of that?
Yeah, so the most challenging part was for sure getting all the necessary information into one page. Uh, and I wanted it to be a one pager because I think a lot of it's a complicated process, right? Uh, it's not as easy as say, the market rate for a 5-minute composition is this much, so all 5-minute compositions should be paid this much. Everyone's process is entirely unique. And creating art with other people is more of a process of sharing each other's humanity, at least to me, uh, instead of creating a commodity. So I wanted to try to show that by just having a simple 4-step process of 4 things to consider when you're trying to set your rate. Um, there is a little bit of math involved in it, but just some basic addition and subtraction. Um, and I wanted it to also be something that folks can give out to their students if they want to, or they can share it as a quick resource, and just something to double check, just to make sure you have your bases covered. And so the way the primer works is it just sort of asks you, and you can treat it like a checklist. Have I considered how much I need on a monthly basis or whatever time span you want to work by? Have I considered how much the commissioner has and what's in their budget? Have I considered other sources of funding for this project to make sure that my time um, is spent ensuring that I make my minimum amount I need to either maintain my current lifestyle or even just to survive? And then finally asking, how does this all fit into the larger picture? How does the economic landscape of the music world work? And most importantly, what privileges do I have that also kind of subsidize the cost of composition that other people do not have or are not given?
Yeah, and I will say that last point really was striking to me, because I think that we, particularly with the movement by some composers to standardize rates, that I think that they don't take into consideration that the economic disparities that are actually around, for particularly non-white, non-male, non-cisgendered individuals. And so I think that really thinking about those privileges, but also economic privileges. Where did you come from? Did you go through an expensive training program? Did you go to graduate school? Do you have some sort of full-time employment that subsidizes your what you're doing? I think that these are all really important questions to ask.
Absolutely. And one point I'll add is also even if you just think about having an instrument, my family, we just went through the process together of all chipping in to buy a flute that's actually going to be shared. um, and we need a quality instrument, and flutes are made of silver. You need several $1,000s in many cases to have an instrument. Now, if you're a vocalist, then you still need stuff like training, um, and I mean, the field itself is just designed around a lot of expensive stuff. So yeah, the economic barriers, and also think about how that's tied to race. How white folks are more likely to inherit wealth than people of color. And then also think about how LGBT folks are more likely to lose that inherited wealth if they come out to their family, or if their family disowns them, which they're much more likely to do than if they were, gender normative and straight. That's the word.
Which I am not.
Right.
So I understand that. Yeah. The other thing on your primer that was really striking to me was the calculating the number of hours that you spend on a project. I think that for some people like myself, that's actually really challenging to comprehend because I a lot of my work isn't necessarily sat actively composing in front of a computer or in front of a notepad or however I'm composing. A lot of it is spent going on a walk or cooking in the kitchen or taking a shower or whatever. And like, is that composing time from a economic point, from a should I be compensated for that inactive composition time? And I think that's why I actually really struggle with that rate part. But I think that but I'd be really curious to hear from you what your thoughts are about one, timing yourself to see how much time do you spend doing this, but also in that inactive time.
Right. Yeah. So I personally prefer to just time the kind of butt in the seat time. I think that's helpful for me, not just in, you know, figuring out how long it takes to put stuff down into the computer, but it also helps me in setting blocks of time to say, okay, I'm going to be composing for this amount of time and I'm going to do it. I'm not going to do anything else. So it's helpful for me to just sort of organize that. But I'm right there with you. A lot of my composition work is spent in walks. It's spent reading. It's in the shower. Uh, there is so much inspiration. It's even in my dreams, right? And I'm sure like a lot of folks like dream up their music. Uh, but the problem with that is that's hard to time, right? Once like some notes start popping in your head, you can't just be like, oh, gotta pull up my timer. Um, so what I did instead was I just put a cushion in there. I said to time yourself sitting sitting down and just like doing um, doing the work, something that like if someone else were watching, they'd be like, yes, they are they are working. Um, and to either double your rate or double the amount of hours that take. Either way, that leads to the same number. And having that cushion there, um, I think, is a fair balance of kind of standardizing the amount of time inactive time that it does take because it, as and I'm also talking about contracted labor here. So when you're thinking about pricing as a freelancer, you typically want to calculate how much a project will cost by taking the amount of labor it is and multiplying it by your rate. And it's a lot easier to justify um, that when, and it's a lot easier to standardize the amount of hours a project takes when you do that timing and you provide that both a cushion of double the amount of hours that you think it takes and double the rate. So, for example, if for me, there's about 100 hours of labor that goes into a composition project, and also I find that the length of the piece does not matter that much actually. So that's why I don't charge per minute. For others, that might work. So this is another place where it can be totally, customizable. But yeah, for me, I'd say I take 100 hours. I need a minimum of $15 an hour, so I double that. So the rate would be $30 an hour. Multiply that um, by the 100 hours, and then schedule, but don't contract 200 hours. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And I think that some people listening might feel like those numbers seem higher than what you've been able to get in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say this is the challenging thing is that notoriety can be really challenging because I feel like the thing that I really struggle with setting rates and with talking about these among other composers is that we all have our own experiences getting paid commissions. And when you've said numbers and then someone walks, right? And I know I had a couple of examples in my video, but I will also say that I get really scared of saying a number that is too high, and then um, the the commissioner then decides that, hey, this number is too high, and I don't want to offend you by offering you any less than that. Even though, quite frankly, I probably would have taken less than that, because if the difference is $0 and maybe 20 to 30% less than what I was initially asking for, I would rather have the little bit than nothing, right?
Right.
Because we still do have bills, we still have to eat, and I know, like, I am very fortunate that I have other sources of income, that are a lot of different sources of income, that are all very small amounts, but together they make it work, right? But and some people don't have those extra sources of income. So I think that's the really challenging part for me. And so I'd be really curious to hear what your thoughts were um, on subsidizing those costs. Still thinking about, this is what I need to make to survive. This is what someone's willing to pay me, which doesn't match that number. How do I make that up?
Yeah. Yeah. So, one easy thing to remember is just that we're dealing with averages in the numbers we're working on. So everything doesn't have to be, either 30 freelance hours, or if you're working a part-time, full-time job, because that's full-time time for you, so you don't have to double it there. So that's 15. Then it just have to average to that. So if you work let's say you work a part-time job that pays you a little more than $15 an hour, then you have a surplus there. And that surplus can be used to make up the difference between what the commissioner is able to offer you and how much you need. This is also why I typically try to ask folks, how much they are able to make, or able to offer. Um, Want to do that, and two, I try to make my process as transparent as possible. If you go to my website, you see I have a stage 0, stage 1. There's a very formalized process with the entire commission collaboration. And that's my way of kind of saying, like, hey, this is more than just me kind of writing down notes real quick and giving it to you. This is a long-term investment in each other's musicality. And so when you frame it like that, then you get numbers first, which is to your advantage. You can do the math yourself, figure out if you can afford that difference. And if not, then you can go back and say, I was like, hey, after running the math, I really can't afford to take this project on for less than this amount. And then you can, you don't have to show them how much you need for your living expenses. In fact, don't do that. But you can kind of you can kind of show that, it's like, hey, you're showing that you need this amount for your time and to be compensated. And if they're not able to make that kind of minimum, then if you're in a situation where, say you don't have other opportunities to use that time to make money, then you can say, I was like, okay, I would prefer, can we like get the rate up to here because this is how much I need, but let's work something out. See if you can also get like extra performances, extra anything that can invest you further into your career, because notoriety, as I think you said before, is like that's so important. Especially, well, it depends on who is commissioning you, but for more established musicians, and really for anyone, it's helpful to say, it's like, oh yeah, I've been working with these ensembles. Here's a professional recording, here's a commercial recording label, all of that. So there are situations where you can negotiate something that's not priced as well, if you're able to afford that. And it's also possible that sometimes people will just walk no matter what. And I think, sometimes opportunities are missed, and sometimes you gotta just shrug about that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think that the thing that you said at the end there, about added value, right? Value does not have to be monetary, right?
Right.
And as we, I know that as we look into like Marxist theory and production cost and what is value. Value is not always monetary. Value can be social, right? The I say this in my video. The my friends over at the Fifth House Ensemble love to say that your network is your greatest currency, right? And I like that phrase because it's catchy, it's easy to remember. Um, but but the one thing that I think that people struggle with, and it's not me, but like a lot of people struggle with network because network comes across as less collaborative. It comes across as less relationship oriented. It comes across as businessy, right? And I actually I don't have a problem with the word network because I don't view my friendships with my very close friends, who tend to be the people that I write music for, um, as I didn't network them. They're people who are relationships that I formed just through we became friends, and one day I said, or they came to me, we said, I want to work with you. I want to work with you. And, depending on where I'm at with things, kind of helps determine that aspect of the relationship. And that's important for my process. This isn't always everybody's process. Um, I think that if you look at my artist, like an artist statement that I might make, I almost always say that the relationship with my collaborators is like the most important aspect of my creative process, right? That's the most important. And I think that's also, I work a lot with individuals. I'm not working as much with institutions, which I think is that's a completely different uh, conversation when we're talking about commissions. And I think that's the part that people, I think, misunderstand when they think about setting their rates. I really struggle setting rates higher for when I'm working with individuals because I'm asking someone who doesn't have money to give me money, right? And yes, they get something out of it. They're getting my time. They're getting the value of my work. They're getting the value of my composition. They're getting the value of the fact that I have my own network, right? That said, um, I also know that they are coming from, I don't have a lot of I I don't necessarily have the financial ability to cover the cost of that, and I never want money to be the reason why I don't get to work with someone that I'm excited to work with. And I think that that's the important part from the performer's perspective, to know that, at least from my perspective, I don't want money to be the reason why we don't work together. I want, um, you know, and I think for composers, a really important thing is, hey, not right now. That doesn't
Mhm.
mean forever, right?
Right.
Just because I'm saying no to your offer at this point in your career, that doesn't mean 5 years from now, when you've figured your own funding sources out, you figured out your own commissioning process out, that we can work together in the future. And I think that's the difference between taking a relationship oriented network as opposed to just a business oriented network, right?
Mhm.
And I'm actually going to use just talking with Nebal right now as a wonderful example of this. I Nebal and I have talked 3 times, right? Like, where we've actually had a conversation, right? And it's all been about the same thing, right? We met through mutual channels, um, but I'd seen their name a few times online and was loving the work that they were doing and wanted to learn more. And so I reached out and said, "Hey, let's chat." Um, and I wasn't did not call Nibal to film an episode of my show because I felt like, hey, Nibal will add value to my show. I called Nibal because Nibal was awesome and I wanted to get to know them, right? And I think that that's the difference, right? Is that when you see someone that you think is interesting, your immediate response shouldn't be, hey, this person could get me ahead. It should be, I like what this person is doing and I want to get to know them because knowing cool people is good for life, right?
right? And I'll just like add one point to that. I mean, everything you said was fantastic, um, but I'll just add people generally can tell when you're talking to them because you're trying to get something out of them. So not only, is it not practically helpful, it could actually hurt you and your reputation, uh, especially as um, especially for folks who try to be someone they're not. Um, and I get it. As artists, like we tend to be weird people. Uh, but yep.
Yeah, absolutely, totally weird. I'm really weird. I don't know how anyone puts up with me. Um, um,
Same
yeah,
here. Yeah.
yeah. I no, you're right. And one of my least favorite experiences is when I go to a concert, and I know we miss those, but like I remember going to a concert in Seattle when I lived there, and I saw a guy, and I kid you not, he was what I am calling cruising for commissions at a concert, right? And I call like it is so obvious what this person was doing. It was transparent what they were doing. Um, you know, yes, you need to be transparent, but you need to also like be a good person. Like why do we even have to ask that? But we do. And I think it could be really challenging to navigate creating a career in music, and being able to compensate yourself, because yes, we still do have certain needs in the society we live in. Unfortunately, a capitalist society where we have to pay the bills, we have to pay for food, we have to pay for rent, we have to pay for this and that. And don't even get me started on if you have a family and other expenses that are maybe even beyond your control. And so, you know, you have to still keep in mind that the other people in this field are going through the same stuff. Um, and so that's the approach that I always take when working with at least individuals as opposed to working with institutions, which I think is a completely different animal.
Right. No, for sure. And I think, and just to tie it all back again to what you said earlier about value, um, like we said, there are many different ways to get value. So you don't have to enter a, commission project that you're not thrilled about. If you feel like you're not getting enough out of it, um, you know, try thinking about, okay, how much do like studio recordings cost? How much does it cost to like put on a concert and stuff like that? Consider those costs as well and add those to the amount of value that you get. Now, at the end of the day, concerts don't feed you unless there's you know, uh, like reception. But um, uh, I definitely used receptions as like dinner in college, but that's not healthy. Uh,
Just cheese and
yeah,
crackers.
yeah. Well, some
Maybe
people like
maybe
went
there's a
all.
vegetable platter. Then
Yeah,
you got your protein, you got your fat, and you got your vegetable.
yeah. There you go. Yeah, but yeah. So I mean, if you're in a situation where you're like, you need to eat, you need to make rent, you need to make your bills, it, like we said, I think it's important to reiterate. You can say it was like not at this time. I can't afford this right now, but also like maintain that relationship. Check in every so often. Um, be a friend to them. And if you keep that relationship going, at some point they'll probably be like, "Hey, I'm in a better state now. Are you in a better state now? Let's work." Sometimes, and sometimes it literally takes people like years to come up to a composer and ask to commission them. Sometimes they save up, and so I think especially when you think about your network or your community, um, know that these are long-term relationships, uh, and any kind of crisis economic mode you might be in right now, those are hopefully short term, at least shorter than the lifespan of your fellow human beings. Um, yeah, so
I
keep those
agree.
relationships going.
Okay, so as we continue this conversation, I think that it's important to talk just a little bit more about the privileges that we talked about a little bit earlier, that uh, some composers have, particularly when we're talking about composers of color versus composers of color and the privileges that they may not have composing. And so I was wondering. If you could add some insight to commissioners and to other composers, um, to just add a little nuance to this discussion.
Right. So I don't think it's a secret that there is a large pay gap between like white composers and composers of color, particularly LGBT composers of color. Um, yeah, and that starts all the way from education. Many of us have to go through like a traumatizing experience in um, our undergrad education to even enter the field. So there's already a huge pipeline that just kind of funnels out a lot of folks just from the get go. Um, and from there, there's still a whole bunch of um, there are just a whole bunch of biases that really run unchecked. I think a lot of commissioners, I just kind of want to ask was like, just look at the people you're commissioning, and look at all the amazing, you know, composers of color, LGBTQ composers out there, and really think like, one, am I even programming the best music um, out of everyone that I know, or is within reach of a network I have? Because I think a lot of folks, they tend to stick around people who are like them, and especially white folks. And if you really if you really put in the effort to get to know people of color as human beings, not as like data points in a like database, um, then you can discover that there's actually a lot of like world-class quality music out there. And one thing that I'm getting a little bit sick of is just seeing a lot of opportunities go to white composers who I know, like, a composer of color could not write a piece of that quality and get that performance from that ensemble. We really do have to be twice, thrice, 10 times better than our white counterparts to be considered as equals. Um, yep.
Yeah,
So pay us more.
yeah, no, I agree, and and it's funny because I have a number of friends who come to me, who are not white, who are composers and performers, and they ask me for my advice on some of these subjects, and I I actually really struggle because my main advice is you should go talk to this composer who might have a better understanding of how to advise you on this, because I don't have the same experience as you, even as a gay Hispanic Jew, as I like to say. Or today, I really, a friend of mine told me this funny thing that I'm left of queer, which I thought was funny. The you know I think that it's important to say that there while there is a community of composers of color, that are around, and it could be really challenging if you go to school for composition, or maybe you didn't go to school for composition, and the only composers that you're seeing are white composers getting performed, or you're the only non-white person in your school. And I'm sure when you're in discussions, you're the person who gets asked, when you're talking about social justice issues, we have to ask the non-white composer what they think, right? um, even if they don't have an opinion.
Right.
But which is its own problem. But but I think that I think it's important that there is a community of people out there who also have had the same experience as you, in the sense of just the money and the professional aspect of things, where um, they didn't have this role models either. They really had to figure it out. But from my experience, a lot of these folks, even as exhausting as it is to take on the mentorship role, and I, as much as I love doing it, because I do actually, um, you know, I at least I've seen uh, composers of color really step it up to take on these mentorship roles, and I'm not saying that they should have to, but I will say I'm applauding the composers of color for taking on these mentorship roles and for taking on this work, because it's valuable work, and it is really helpful work to help us create a more inviting, I think inviting is a good word,
Right.
community that makes people feel welcome. Because I think that that is part of it, is the imposter syndrome aspect, and the that ability to feel like, well, I don't belong here because nobody looks like me.
Right.
And so I agree with you, and it's challenging. So what do you think that white composers should be doing when setting their rates? I know you addressed this a little bit on your primer.
Yeah. Uh, so in general, white people should just give us money. It's really that simple. Well, give us money and give us resources. Um, as white folks, you all have inherited a lot of wealth that has over generations been stolen by mainly Black and Indigenous folks, along with so many immigrants who have labored and who, to use Marxist ideology, but like whose surplus value has gone to y'all. Now, there is like a huge class component to it. Like poor white people exist. Like I get that, and if you don't have money, like if it's a choice between you eating and like paying reparations, like you can figure yourself out for a little bit. It's fine. Go like hassle your rich uncle, like. But I think white folks, no matter what field you're in, are in a much easier position to receive a surplus of more than they need for their lifestyle. Um, so the same rules still apply. Like, don't charge less. If anything, charge more and then dedicate a percentage of that income that goes over your needs into your community, and really think about, okay, who is my community and who are the most marginalized people in my community. Um, I don't advocate for like giving to like rich people of color. Um, Instead, really think about like any community programs that reduce the harm caused by homelessness, by redlining, um, and a whole bunch of different things. Contribute to people's GoFundmes. Follow artists on Patreon like me, uh, and yeah,
Do them, then do me.
yeah,
Then do them first.
yeah. But yeah, there are so many ways. There are so many ways you can help, and everyone has resources. If you don't have a lot of extra money, but you have time, give your time. There are, trust me, there are people in your community who need volunteers. I would recommend going straight to like people who run like mutual aids, and communal networks instead of like a nonprofit. Um, and that also involves knowing and connecting with the whole of your community, not just staying within your class, or a small specific group, but really think about, where do I live, and who are who are the people that are left behind, who is not in my circle, but who's in my community.
I completely agree, and I also think that that's something that a lot of composers who are making careers, particularly at the early stage, um, where maybe they are still trying to navigate even finding work, right?
Right.
And I actually think that there is a lot that you can do within your community, your own community. It doesn't have to be New York City. And I know I like to harp on New York City quite a bit because I did live there for a little bit of time, and I know that that is what people assume is where all new music and contemporary music is happening, right? Which is not true. There's so much amazing things that are happening all over the country, all over the world, in contemporary music. Uh, Canada has some really great contemporary music. There's some really spectacular contemporary music that happens in the Middle East. Like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know about some of it, and I like in more recent years I've been exposed to like this like golden age of like electronic music that has
Yep.
happened in the Middle East that is spectacular. And if you haven't heard it, like I'll give you a couple things to listen to, and I'm sure Nebal has a couple of suggestions as well. But
Yeah.
but like there's so much music happening out there, and I think that which implies that you could actually rely on your own community, not necessarily to get you paid, but to help build your career through just being a part of that community. And that means volunteering your time. That means showing up to events. You planning a concert isn't gonna be how you make it big in music in your community, because you really haven't added a whole lot of value necessarily to this community just by providing this music event, right?
Right.
Adding value to your community could just mean showing up to somebody's event because they need people there, and you've now added value because you gave them your time, of just showing up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how much easier it is to ask someone to give you their value, their time, if you just showed up for their thing, right?
Right.
And we're not talking about people in the music community. I'm talking about non-musical people because I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure the work that you do is really interesting. I'm sure they would find it interesting, but you need to get them. You need to create that relationship first. And if you don't want to invest that time, and this isn't about growing your career, this is about growing your community and being a part of that community. And I think that that's the part that people don't understand when building a network, building an audience, building all that. You have to do the work as a community member, and be nice to be around, right? Like be pleasant person in that community, and uh, be someone that the community relies on. It's so much easier to want to help you and help you build your own contemporary music audience when once you've done that.
Right. Yeah. And I'll say is like if you feel like there isn't a community for you, trust me, there is one, especially on the age of the internet. You know, just keep looking for it. It took me a little while to find a community of fellow like queer Arabs, but there's a thriving one actually, um, and we're connected all over the country, and and like yeah, I mean, if I as like a Druze queer Druze person can find community, um, you can too. Uh, so it's also a matter of finding the right people and finding people you want to build community with, while also still constantly thinking about like, okay, what implicit biases do I have running that can keep some valuable people out of my inner circle, um, that I should address. Yeah.
Absolutely, totally agree. I do think we should wrap things up here a little bit. And so, what what last piece of advice do you have for people listening, people watching, when setting their rates, to be that are the most fair for you, but also the most fair for everybody involved?
I would say like the most important thing to think about is just have open communication and be, you know, give yourself permission to be honest honest with yourself, and honest with the person you're collaborating with. And just sit down, write some numbers down, see what works, see what doesn't. Try to make it work. See if there's value from other places that you can afford to have, while also being aware and being accepting of what your needs are, and understand that sometimes, as as much as I would love for us to live in a world where you get your needs met according to like what you're able to do, um, that's not the world we have. That's And there are so many people out there who have the potential to be tremendous artists, who are tremendous artists, who don't share their craft for several reasons, or who don't have time to do their craft. Folks with families and multiple jobs, uh, a lot of lower income folks, a lot of folks who come from a culture that has stigmatized the arts as, for being not lucrative enough to build familial wealth. Um, so many things. So don't think of the arts as also something with a lot of competition that you kind of have to fight with, um, and you have to like compare rates with other people. That's another thing. Don't do that. Like your rates are your own, and every situation is so unique. Trust me, it's it's really best not to make any comparisons. Um, but just know that the everyone is an artist in some way, and we need to work on making sure that everyone has the ability to express them art. Everyone should have the ability to express themselves through whatever medium they want, and we should be working to provide education, resources, instruments, in some cases supplies, whatever's needed, so that more people in our communities can be a part of the art making process.
I agree with everything you said, and the one thing I will say is artists comparing rates versus artists sharing rates are not the same thing, right?
Right.
And I think that's important because at the end of the day, I think particularly for those first exiting school, right? I think it's actually really valuable to just have a baseline idea of what some people are making, and it's not for the sake of that you should set your rates as the same thing, right?
Right.
It's about having an idea of this is potentially what I can do, so that way I can plan my life around. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I can start planning. Okay, well, this is approximately what I can get. This is approximately, at this point in my career. Wait, I'm not charging that much, but I'm also 10 years younger than this composer. I'm not a failure, right?
Right.
Like, and I think that's the part why it was really important for me to share about approximately how much I was charging. I'm not charging enough. And I know that I'm not charging enough, but I also think that I I know a number of composers who are slightly younger than I am, or even much younger than I am, that feel like because they haven't gotten a paid commission yet that they're not doing it right, and that's just not true. It's not how it works. Everyone's situation is different. I charge what I charge because that has been the experience that I have, and this is what I've had access to. Um, I think that you can use that information to help you realize that we're all different. We all have our own needs, and at the end of the day, um, it's somewhat out of your control what every single commissioner is going to be able to pay you. Um, that said, and I'm going to say it one last time before we finish, um, pay people of color more. Period. Pay LGBT people more.
Yep.
Pay women more. And I know that these are all identities, but there's pay disparity, and that is really important that we address, and that it's really important that we try to correct. And so Nibal, I must say that this conversation was an absolute pleasure to have you join me here and talk about this, because I think it's so important, and I think that your opinion is so incredibly valuable as we talk about added value, and I think that you've done that for our community. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. It was such a great pleasure being here.
So hey, have a wonderful evening, and I look forward to maintaining our relationship.
Same here.